Bliss, Victoria, Taikia, Karen, and Jeremy. Martin Luther King was born January 15, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. Martin Luther King, as both a Baptist member and a civil rights activist, had a great impact on the United States, beginning in the mid-1950s. He was the leader of the SCLC. Through his activism, he played an important role in ending segregation of African American citizens in all nations, especially in the South, as well as the creation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. King had received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964, among several other honors. King was assassinated in April 1968, but until this day continues to be remembered as one of the most famous African American leaders in history, mostly remembered by his famous "I Had a Dream" speech. A little about Martin Luther King Jr. was not only that he was born in Georgia, but he had an older sister, Christine King Ferris, born in 1927, and a younger brother, Alfred Daniel Williams King. He grew up in the City Suite, Auburn neighborhood. Martin Jr.'s parents couldn't shield him completely from racism, though they completely tried. Martin Luther King fought against racial prejudice, not just because his race suffered, but because he considered racism and segregation to be an affront to God's will. He strongly discouraged any type of authority over a lesser race. King attended Booker T. Washington High School, where he was said to be almost a slack-off student. Eventually, he did, however, grow out of that and put his intelligence to use and skipped both the 9th and the 11th grade and entered the Morehouse College in Atlanta at age 15 in 1944. Martin Luther King Jr. earned a sociology degree from Morehouse College and attended the liberal Critzart Theological Seminary in Chester, Pennsylvania. King then enrolled in a graduate program at Boston University, earning a doctorate in systematic theology 2 years later. While in Boston, he met his future wife, Coretta Scott. They eventually married and had 4 children of their own. Racism was very popular in the community, and these incidents made a prime example. The King family had been living in the Montgomery for less than, I'd say, a year when the highly segregated city became the center of struggling and pain for civil rights in America. On December 1st, 1955, they got another chance to make their case. That evening, a 42-year-old named Rosa Parks got into Cleveland Avenue bus to go home for a very tiring day at work. She decided to sit in the first row of the colored section in the middle of the bus. As the bus traveled and continued to go along its way, the more white passengers began to load the bus. The bus driver stated that there were several white men standing and demanded every single African American, including Rosa Parks, to stand up and to give up her seat. 3 African Americans gave up their seats out of fear because that was usually common, but Rosa Parks remained seated. The driver asked her again to give up her seat, but she refused. Parks was arrested and booked for violating the Montgomery City Code. On that night, Rosa was arrested. Edie Nixon, head of the local NAACP chapter, met with Martin Luther King and other local civil rights leaders to plan a citywide boycott. King was elected to lead the boycott because he was young, well-trained, and very intelligent, and had solid family connections. He also had a professional standing. The boycott lasted 382 days of walking to work, harassment, violence, and intimidation for the Montgomery's African American community. Eventually, after being defeated in several lower court rulings and suffering large financial losses, the city of Montgomery lifted the law mandating segregated public transportation. Persuaded by the boycott's success, in 1957, Martin Luther King and other civil rights activists, which most were fellow ministers, founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, also known as the SCLC group, committed and dedicated to achieving full equality for African Americans through nonviolence. In his role, Martin Luther King traveled across the entire country. He worked with a number of civil rights and religious groups to organize the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, a peaceful political rally designed to show the horrid light on the injustice African Americans continued to face across the country. The march included the famous I Had a Dream speech, a spirited call for peace and equality. It also emphasized his belief that someday all men can be brothers and sisters as one. Martin Luther King was soon assassinated on April 4th, 1968. He was shot on the balcony of Memphis, where he traveled to support a sanitation workers' strike. Martin Luther King was a great leader that stopped at absolutely nothing to achieve justice. He spoke powerfully and everyone believed every word he said. His community and followers trusted him and believed in him. He totally changed the way American was and gave citizens hope. He put an end to segregation and was the most influential leader of the civil rights movement. Dr. King's words came true, and now you can see African Americans in office, holding buildings, and also marrying and being friends as one in the world. And these are my 5 items. But once again.